who was charged with the offense of grazing. Grazing. Probably, if you're like me, you didn't know what it was. I didn't know until it came before me. Grazing is an offense that occurs when a person goes in a store and selects grapes and samples the grapes and samples the various fruits in the store. Ordinarily, that's not a really big deal. But at some point, if the store concludes that you're doing more than sampling, then the store charges you with this crime of grazing. I remember when the person came before me, I was so shocked by it that I had to do a little bit of research. My point to you is, you can be arrested for it, you can be brought to court for it, and hopefully you'll be judged fairly when you get to court. In the case that I had, it was disposed of without the person being found guilty, without the person having to go to trial. But trials are things that do occur in court, and they can occur for something as simple as eating more fruit than a person thinks that you should consume. So let's start here now with a few questions, because as I go through each of these examples, I'll give you an opportunity to ask a question, then I'll go to another example. If you have a question, I'm going to ask that you raise your hand, and then I'll point to you, and you can ask your question. Now, as it relates to this offense, which is a crime, it's a Class C misdemeanor of grazing, what would a question be that you might have if you were before a judge who charged you with grazing? What would your question be to the judge? I'm your judge today. Yes, sir. We'll start with you. Could you stand up, please, sir, so that I can hear you well? Thank you.
I asked the store he was in the store why they made the grapes.
All right. His question would be, why do you have these things exposed? Hold just a moment, please. I can only answer one question at a time. His question was, why would you leave these things exposed? They leave them exposed, I will tell you this, so that people can see them. And the truth is, they don't mind people sampling them. But at some point, they decide when your sampling becomes more than a sample and it becomes consumption to the extent that they're losing money. That's the way they see it. So that's what they would probably say to you. Okay, I saw a young lady's hand. Where was the young lady's hand? I'm going to try to alternate between men and women, if I may. Young lady, was that you, ma'am? No. Okay. All right, then I'll go to the young man who had his hand up, sir. Okay, the young man here, yes, sir. Can you stand, please?
How much food does it take?
How much do you consume before it's no longer just sampling?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's subjective. That's why this young man that appeared before me was not found guilty, because the amount in question, I thought, was not enough to merit a finding of guilt in the circumstance that was presented to me. But now, every judge has his own opinion about things and his own discretion about it. So in my case, I had one point of view. Another judge might have another point of view. So just be mindful of this. Okay, if there are no more questions on this, I'm going to go to something else. Any more questions on this? All right. I have had persons to appear in my court because they did not pay their rent. And because they didn't pay the rent, they were being evicted from the court, through the court. They were being evicted from their home. Every person has a right to be heard, and you get to explain to a judge why you could not pay the rent. In a great many cases, people are allowed to pay the rent and they continue to live in their homes. I am a person who believes that if there's a person about to be evicted, that person ought to have every opportunity to stay in the home, give them as much time as possible, give them the opportunity to pay the rent. But not paying your rent is a reason for a person to bring you to court to be evicted. This is on the civil side. Before I talk to you about criminal law, which involves paying fines or going to jail or both, on the civil side, it involves two people who are citizens, neither of which is involved with the police or the court, who have a dispute, and they can resolve their dispute in court as well. So now, about being evicted for not paying your rent. Who has the first question? That was pretty clearly explained, I see. All right, let's move to the next topic. I've got plenty of topics. Let's assume you are stopped by the police. I assume that many of you drive, and you're driving your car and you're stopped by the police, the question becomes, how much do you have to tell the police when the police start to ask you questions? Let's assume you're stopped because you were speeding. If you're stopped because you were speeding, what do you have to say to the police beyond questions about speeding? And how much do you have to say as it relates to speeding? Who would like to tell me? Yes, sir. If you stand, please. Sir? Okay, you can ask an officer, why was I stopped? That is a fair question. Anytime you're being stopped by a police officer, you have the right to know why. So asking why is a fair question. And then the officer can tell you why. Let's assume the officer says you were doing 85 in a 25 zone, and your position is that you were not doing 85. What would your response be to the officer? He says the speed limit is 25 and you were doing 85. What would your response be? Anybody want to tell me? Please stand up, man. Would you stand, please, man? Yes. You would say you were late for work? All right, if you were late for work, do you think that is reason for the officer not to give you a ticket?
Sometimes.
Okay, so you're saying yes, he can give you the ticket, but this is why you were speeding, you were late for work. All right. Can you have a justification for doing 85 in a 25? Is there any justification? Okay, sir, in the yellow, if you'll stand, please.
Well, like if you have like a family member that's dying or something.
Okay, an emergency. An emergency. Emergency circumstances, officers do pay attention to emergencies. Officers can use discretion when they stop you if you're speeding and you have an emergency. So he indicated that he had a family member that might be dying. That is the kind of thing that officers would clearly give some consideration to. And it's not unusual for officers, if they genuinely believe what you're saying, to provide you some help in getting to the place that you're going to. So an emergency, that's a reason. Now let's assume that you disagree with the officer about the ticket and you don't believe you should be given the ticket. You think that the officer is not being fair to you and shouldn't give you the ticket. What do you do in that circumstance? Who would like to respond first? Okay, let me ask you this. Should you have that dispute with the officer right then and there? No. And say to the officer, look, this is wrong. I'm not going to accept this ticket because I was not speeding. Should you do that?
No.
No, you are absolutely correct. If you have a dispute, what should you do about that dispute?
Take it to court.
All right, I've heard many people say take it to court, and that is correct. You take your dispute to court, and you explain it to a judge. And hopefully the judge will understand your side of the case, and if you have the credible evidence, then you'll get your case disposed of without your being found guilty. That is an option for you, to take it to court. Well, let's assume you go to court and you explain it, and you believe that the judge did not give you a fair decision. The judge did not give a fair decision, or maybe you didn't have all of your evidence that day. You've got some evidence at home or some other place that you just didn't have with you. Maybe there's a witness that you didn't have with you. What can you do if the judge rules against you? What can you do? Okay, I heard someone say, take it to another court. Was that you, sir? Okay, this gentleman says, take it to another court, and that is correct. You can appeal. You can have, the judgment of the first judge is usually not the final judgment. You can have another judge consider it, because judges make mistakes like other people in life. And if they make mistakes, they ought to be corrected. Well, a judge can always correct his or her own mistake, but the judge can also have that mistake corrected by another judge in a higher court. And usually cases can go to multiple courts. They can go to more than one court for the purpose of having something corrected. Now, here's a good question for you. Let us assume that you are stopped by the officer, and the officer is very rude to you. Very rude. Maybe he's having a very bad day, and he is very rude to you. How would you respond to an officer who is very rude to you? Very rude to you. Just really rude. How would you respond? All right, sir, if you'll stand up, please. Okay, this gentleman says you can ask for his badge number, and you can. All right, is there something else you might do if the officer is really rude? Really rude. Yes, ma'am. Would you please stand, ma'am? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I still be polite, like they might apologize or something like that.
Okay, you can be polite, which is both of these are good points. If you are polite, you know the officers are now recording what you say, so there's a recording. It will show that you have been polite, and you'll see how the officer behaved. I think that that can be very helpful to you to be polite for many reasons. One reason that can be helpful is you can prevent something from getting out of hand, from escalating, from becoming more than it should be. You can get it resolved in court later on without something happening right then and there. You've heard the stories, and there are many, about how people get stopped for a minor traffic violation, and as a result of being stopped for a minor traffic violation, gets out of hand, and someone gets hurt. Well, you can avoid that many times by just being polite. And even though the officer may be having a bad day, may have said something that's inappropriate, being polite can be helpful. That can also work the other way. If the person that stopped has had a bad day, and you're not in the best of moods, and the person says something that is inappropriate to the officer, if the officer is polite, that can keep something from getting out of hand as well. It is always good for people to try to do what they can to resolve things without them getting out of hand. Now, officers have a distinct advantage over you when they're talking to you, because the officer not only has the force of law by virtue of being an officer, the officer also has the firepower to back up whatever he says. So, you know, it's his discretion as to when to use more than words. And what you don't want to do is cause the officer to believe that more than words should be used. Next point, when an officer stops you and your driver's license is in your glove compartment, it's not on your person, but in your glove compartment, and the officer is coming over to the car and you need your driver's license, what should you do?
You can grab it.
No.
Officers coming to the car. Would you raise your hand, please? Yes, sir. Would you stand and tell us, please? Stand, please. Thank you, sir.
Just wait. He gonna tell you to get it.
All right. He says that you should wait. Okay. You'll take your seat. Yes, sir.
Sometimes they don't even work. So you could tell the police officer.
Tell him what?
Tell the police officer to get it. So, because they might.
Okay. So you can tell the police officer to do something. I couldn't quite pick up what you said, but tell the police officer to do something else. All right. Here's a pretty good answer. If the officer is approaching the car, a good thing to do is to keep your hands visible. Put them on the steering wheel so that they'll be visible. They can be easily seen. And as the officer approaches the car, keep your hands clearly visible. You do not, as the officer is approaching, want to reach over to open up your glove compartment and get your driver's license, or even if it's on the seat next to you. Maybe you just happen to put your wallet on the seat next to you. You don't want to reach over to pick up your wallet so that you can hand it to the officer. You want to wait until the officer is there and can see your hands, and then when the officer says, "May I have your driver's license?" Then you would say to the officer, "My driver's license is on the seat," or "My driver's license is in the glove compartment," and then the officer can suggest to you that you would get your driver's license from wherever it happens to be, and then you would show it to the officer. But if you do it before the officer gets to the car and he sees you reaching, the officer may think that you're reaching for something other than your driver's license, which is one of those circumstances where things that are quite innocent can get out of hand, and persons then can find themselves in circumstances that are really difficult to resolve. So it's good to just wait until the officer gets to the car, have your hands on the steering wheel, let the officer then ask you to get your license, and then you do so. Now, let's assume that you have your license and you show your driver's license to the officer, and then the officer says, step out of the car. Step out of the car. You don't think that you were speeding. The officer is saying to you, step out of the car. What do? All right, who has a hand up? Let's see the hand. I guess in the very rear, sir. If you'll stand, please, sir. Sir?
Never mind.
All right, sir, we'll pass on you. Who else? All right, the lady says that spoke earlier, just step out of the car. That is very good advice. Just step out of the car. Now the officer says, put your hands on the car, up on the car. You put your hands on the car. I have gone through this myself, so don't feel as though it can only happen to you. It has happened to me, where an officer stopped me, asked me to get out of the car, asked me to put my hands up on the car, and then gave me a quick pat down. I was a student at the time, by the way. A quick pat down, and then proceeded to explain to me why he stopped me. All of this was done before the officer explained why he stopped me. And he said that he stopped me because a car similar to my car, that looked like my car, had been involved in some kind of crime. And so they were just checking me to see if I might be associated with that, or if that car was associated with that. So I put my hands up. The officers did what they did. I had my opinions about it, given that I wasn't speeding. I didn't do anything wrong. I thought that it was unfair of the officer to do what he did. But my thinking that it was unfair and complying prevented it from becoming more than a traffic stop. That was a traffic stop. It didn't become a part of my life to the extent that I had to explain it later on to somebody else. It just became a traffic stop. Now, here's a very tough question. The officer stops you, asks you to get out of the car, you get out of the car, and then as you're getting out of the car, the officer grabs you, quickly shoves you up against the car, pushes you, is very rude to you and forceful in terms of how the officer is approaching you. Force and language that you don't like. What do you do when the officer is rude to you, grabs you, throws you up against the car? What do you do? Would you kindly, if you don't mind, please, if you don't mind, please. Please, ma'am. You're speaking well. Please, ma'am. Go right ahead.
After all has been done, I'll go to court and try to tell them what's been going on, and then I can look up on the
Yes, ma'am. Okay, that's a very good point. She's saying, again, you take it to court, and you can then report the officer to the police department, internal affairs. Maybe not the best place in your mind to have something reported, but you can report it. And if you report it, and this officer has other times that he has done the same thing to other people, at some point the record starts to reflect something about this officer that the department ought to correct. So what you're doing is helping someone else when you report these incidents to the police department, to what's called internal affairs. And you should do it. You should report it to help someone else and to build a record about what's going on. So this is, generally speaking, the circumstances that you encounter when there is a stop, when the police decide that they're going to stop you for some reason or another. Now, let's talk about your home. This is a car. Let's talk about your home. Let's assume that a police officer comes to your home and knocks on the door and says to you, may I come in your house and search? May I come in your house and search? Okay, I would like to see hands of people who are willing to stand up and give an answer. I assume, sir, that you're ready to stand up and give an answer now?
You got a search warrant?
Okay, you have a right to ask. Do you have a warrant? People in this country have the right to be in their homes and not be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures. Unreasonable searches and seizures. So the officer can't just drive by and for no reason at all decide that, well, I think I'll just check this house out. You can't do that. you have to have a reason to do that. You've got to have some kind of cause, some kind of probable cause, some reason, some sort of circumstance. So now, let's take this case. Suppose the officer, this is a good one. Suppose the officer is chasing someone who has robbed a bank. And that bank robber stops the car at your house and runs in your house, and the bank robber has been shooting at the officer along the way, and this bank robber runs into your house. Can the officer run in your house behind the bank robber? You are standing at the door, the person runs right in your house right by you. Whose hand shall I see first? Okay, if you'll stand, sir, and give your answer.
I have more questions. Why is your door locked?
To your house? Okay, well, that's a good question. Here's the answer. Here's the answer. You were standing there talking to a friend. You were standing there talking to a friend, and the person runs right by you into your house. Okay, now, can the officer run right by you into your house? Who has the answer? I always have the answers when you don't. I heard someone give an answer. Who wants to give the answer? Don't want to take a guess, huh? All right, here's the answer. If an officer is chasing someone and that person has committed a crime, and that person, as I explained it, has a weapon, the officer has a right, even though you're supposed to have a warrant, to pursue that person who has that weapon, even into a home, because that person could go into that home, you don't know the person, and hurt you, or hurt your children, your family members. So these extraordinary exigent circumstances allow officers to come into your homes without a warrant. But they still have to have that extraordinary circumstance to do it. Otherwise, the officer has to have a warrant before the officer can come into your home. So the general rule is a warrant. Then there are other exceptions to the general rule called exigent circumstances. All right, let's take the case where you and a friend are in a car together, and your friend has something on him or her that is unlawful, but you do not. And when the officer stops you, the officer finds this on your friend, and the officer wants to take both of you into custody. Both of you into custody. Your friend had it, you didn't have it. The officer decides to take both of you into custody. What do you do at that point? You and your friend. Okay? You will, again, save your argument for the judge, as opposed to making your argument right then and there before the officer. Save your argument for the judge in court. That is a very smart thing to do, and that way things don't get out of hand. Now, what about this case? How much do you have to tell an officer if an officer just stops you and decides to start questioning you on the street? How much do you have to tell the officer? If you'll stand and give your answer, I'll recognize you. Yes, ma'am. All right? Officers cannot just stop you for no reason and decide to ask you questions. If they do stop you and they've got probable cause to stop you and they keep you from moving, when your movement is restricted, then officers have to give you some warnings about what your rights are before asking you questions once they start to restrict your movement. Because once you're under arrest, you have a right to be told what your rights are. And if the officer doesn't tell you what your rights are, and the officer asks you questions when you're under arrest, then you, when you get to court, can ask that those answers not be used against you because you were not given your proper warnings. I see a hand right here. Yes, sir, if you'll stand, please. Okay, his question was, What happens if the officer stops you and you have the smell of marijuana on you? You got the smell of marijuana on you. What does that mean? Well, you want to add something? Okay, hold just a second. We're going to have a little bit more added to it. Yes, sir. All right, he says, what if the officer stops you for no reason and he smells it? Well, if an officer stops you for no reason at all, and then something comes up that maybe merits your being arrested, then that stop itself is illegal. And if there's an illegal stop, generally speaking, whatever follows is going to be something that can't be used against you. If he has no reason at all, he just decides, I'm going to pull over your car because you got a fast car, you're a young person, you're driving a Maserati, and he thinks that young people ought not be driving Maserati. So he's going to check you out. Well, that is not proper stop. Okay, having said all of these things and given you all of these examples, now I'm going to open it up, if you would please. I'll recognize you so that you might ask me questions. I'm not going to guarantee you I have the answers to all of your questions, but I will answer your questions to the extent that I can. So with that said, who has a question? Maybe it's about something that I didn't cover, but something that is of interest to you. First question. Anything that is of interest to you can be related to Congress. What do we do in Congress, if you want to know? Some of the things that are related to Congress. Anybody? Okay, if you'll raise your hand, I will recognize you, and then you may ask your questions. Anybody? All right.
Tim right here, he got a question.
Okay, I've just been informed that something that I can do if you have no questions. Anybody? All right. I'm told that you have an interest in impeachment. So I'm going to share some of what's going on with impeachment. I am a graduate of Thurgood Marshall School of Law. I had a great professor there who taught me constitutional law. And impeachment is something that is found in the Constitution. You don't really need to know where it is, but it is there, Article 2, Section 4. You just remember it's in the Constitution. And impeachment allows a president who has committed an offense as defined under Article 2, Section 4, treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. The president commits one of these, the president can be impeached. Impeach means that the president is charged with an offense. It's like being charged, if you were charged with an offense and the grand jury does that, well, the House of Representatives, I'm a Congress member, we are the people who sit as something similar to a grand jury, not the same, and we can decide whether or not a president should be impeached. Any member of Congress can bring the articles of impeachment before the Congress to be voted on. And when they're brought before the Congress to be voted on, they can be voted on up or down, meaning impeached or not impeached, or they can be sent to a committee for a committee to consider the articles, or they can, quite frankly, be tabled so that they may never be heard from again. These are some of the things that can happen. If a president is impeached, then he goes to trial before the Senate, and the Senate will then find the president either guilty or not guilty of the offense charged. Any questions about impeachment? Something that is going on, well, the beginning of it is taking place right now. Yes, sir, in the very rear, if you'll please stand, sir.
If you impeach the president, does the vice president become the president?
Yes, sir. His question has to do with who becomes president, and he said as much. Does the vice president become president? That is absolutely correct. The vice president becomes president if the president is impeached. Of course, the government continues to operate. Any other questions on the question of impeachment? Any other questions? Okay, well, let me just tell you a little bit about Congress as I close. As there are 435 members of Congress elected, and we each have what's called a congressional district. You probably know this. I have the 9th congressional district, and that's in Houston. There are other Congress people in this area. And we do things like vote on laws. But we also have some things that we can't do, which I will go through with you rather quickly. There are some things that we can't do. I just lost my, as I was about to address the things we can't do, I lost my, yeah, here we are. Go back to the first one, please. I want to quickly go through these. Here are some things that Congress can't do. In fact, the first, it's written that the Congress can't make any law that is going to have one religion be better than another religion. We can't tell you what your religious beliefs ought to be. And we cannot in any way stop you from practicing your religion. We cannot stop you from criticizing the president. You live in a country where if you want to criticize the president, you can, and we can't make any laws that says you can't. We cannot prevent you from using the internet with your ideas. We can't stop you from meeting peacefully. And if you go up to the next one, if you want to have a peaceful meeting someplace, you have every right to have that peaceful meeting at some place, the place of your choosing, as long as it is peaceful. And of course, if it's some place that belongs to someone else, you have to get their permission to have use of that place. We can't stop people from carrying guns. In the state of Texas, you've got a right to carry a gun. There's a license that you have to carry your gun. Generally speaking, there are some exceptions to the license. But generally speaking, you have to have a license, and the Constitution has concluded that persons have the right to bear arms. You also have the right to keep the police from just coming into your home and deciding they want to live in your home. There are times when this can be done in times of war, under proper circumstances can happen. But generally speaking, police can't just come into your home. Nobody has a right to just search you for no reason. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Or to search your home for no reason. Or to go into your personal items and belongings for no reason. They have to go to a judge and they have to get a warrant to search whatever property it is that you have that they want to look into. There are times when the military, and we're at war, there are exceptions to some of the things that I've called your attention. Let's go to the next one, number 6, please. And Amendment number 6, these are the 10 amendments to the Constitution. They're called the Bill of Rights. And number 6 is, if you are arrested and charged with a crime, you've got a right to have a trial, and you've got a right to have that trial in the public. They can't take you in some back room and decide to, we can't take you in some back room and decide to have a trial. And Congress can't pass any laws that prevent you from having an open trial. So you have a right to have that trial in the public. There may be some rare circumstance related to persons who are charged with some sort of event that may have occurred someplace else, something associated with war, enemy combatants. The case has to be decided by a jury. So if you are charged with an offense, you have a right to have a jury hear your case. The prosecutor can't object and say, well, we don't want a jury for this case. You can object and say it, but a judge's ruling, a proper ruling, would be that you have a right to have your case presented before a jury. You have a right to have the people who are accusing you come before the court and make their accusations, and you have a right to ask questions of the persons. You have a right to have a lawyer, and if you can't afford a lawyer, you have a right to get a lawyer appointed to represent you. To number 7, please. Thank you. You have a right to the jury, and even in a civil case. In a case between two people who are having a dispute, there's a right to have a jury trial in that case. The 8th Amendment, the government can't make you pay more than is reasonable in bail. There are people who are charged with offenses, and they want to be out while their case is pending before the trial. Well, the judge can't, for a minor offense, decide that you have to post $1 billion or $1 million bail. That would prohibit you from having the opportunity to post a bond. The purpose of the bail is to assure your attendance at the trial, and the judge cannot require you to post bail that is beyond that which would assure your attendance at a trial. Cruel and unusual punishment cannot be imposed upon you, meaning that once you are stopped and arrested and you're convicted, the punishment can't be a whipping. Nobody has a right to whip you as a part of your punishment. And if there are other rights that are not a part of these first 10, then they still exist. The first 10 don't cover everything, and these other rights would still exist, and you still have rights that are not identified. And anything that the Constitution doesn't say Congress can do is left for the states to do. These are the 10 amendments in a rush. There's a lot more to them than what I've said. I want to thank, again, all of the persons associated with this endeavor. I especially want to thank my friend Attorney Daniels for inviting me over today, and all of my other friends who came here with me today in the school. And thank you for being such a great class to talk to. Thank you very much.
I think you guys can do better than that. Can you give Congressman Al Green one more round of applause? Thank you. Now, Ms. Brown, come up, and this concludes our session of today's Street Law class.